6. It's just a single digit, right? But in the professional world, this specific number represents a totally critical, make-or-break honeymoon phase. When a new employee walks through the doors of a company, the clock immediately starts ticking on a very specific window of time. And get this, with some estimates showing that early turnover can cost a company up to 200% of that employee's salary, yeah, 200%, what happens during these first 6 months literally dictates the entire future and the financial viability of that working relationship.
Okay, let's dive into this. Welcome to today's Explainer, where we're going to unpack the hidden language and the exact metrics that HR leaders use to predict the future of their workforce. We're looking directly at the codes that define whether an onboarding phase is a massive triumph or, just another turnover statistic. By the end of our time today, you're going to understand exactly how to quantify the health of a brand new workforce.
Section 1. The 6-month window. So the crucial point here is understanding the absolute strict definition of new hire attrition. We are talking specifically about attrition among employees with less than or exactly equal to 6 months of tenure in the organization. The source data draws this hard, deliberate line in the sand right at the half-year mark. Why 6 months? Well, because this is typically when probation periods wrap up and full integration into the company culture is really expected. We aren't talking about seasoned veterans retiring here or mid-level managers moving on after 3 years. No, this strictly quarantines the data to people who depart before or exactly on their 6-month anniversary. So why do organizations get so fiercely specific with this boundary? The explicit goal is to know the attrition among those specific employees whose tenure is less than 6 months. Think of it kind of like a doctor diagnosing a highly specific illness rather than just treating general fatigue, right? By isolating this exact group, organizations get the ultimate diagnostic tool. It exposes flawed onboarding processes, rather than just brushing it off as a bad hiring fit. It completely separates those immediate early-stage failures from long-term career burnout. Section 2. Tracking the turnover. Let's move to and see how this builds across the whole employee lifecycle. Our source material points us to 3 absolutely critical tracking intervals: monthly, quarterly, and yearly. And this isn't just arbitrary tracking either. At the 1-month mark, HR is actively on the lookout for culture shock, that immediate, visceral first impression. When we zoom out to the 1-quarter or 3-month mark, the focus shifts over to role competency as the hire settles into their actual daily routine. And finally, the yearly tracking reveals long-term alignment. It lets us see how those initial 6-month attrition figures actually fit into the broader annual picture of the organization's overall health.
Section 3. The success rate pivot. Up to this point, we've kind of been looking at early tenure through a slightly cautionary lens, right? Tracking turnover, attrition, who walks out the door. But to get the full picture, we have to shift toward an empowering, positive view of workforce retention. This forces us to ask a totally different question. What is the new hire success rate? It's the essential flip side of the HR coin. Because if attrition measures the departure, the success rate forces us to define and quantify exactly what it means when an employee stays, integrates, and actually thrives.
Now, what's really interesting about this is the stark philosophical contrast it provides. On one side, attrition tracks the failures and the departures within those first 6 months. But success rate, that tracks the wins, the people who integrate and thrive. You literally cannot truly understand the health of your company's onboarding without looking at both sides of this equation simultaneously. They're basically 2 halves of the exact same metric, giving us a complete 360-degree view of early tenure.
But how do we actually measure that success rate in the real world? Well, the text gives us 2 precise quantifiable methods. First up is by number. This is just the raw absolute count of new hires who successfully navigate that early tenure period. Second is by ratio. Now this gives us a proportional understanding, comparing the successful hires against the total number of new employees brought on board. Think about it this way. 10 successful hires sounds great as a raw number. But if you hired 100 people, that 10% ratio tells a very different, kind of worrying story. You absolutely need both figures to find the actual truth.
Which brings us to our final thought for today's explainer. Based on the strict definitions of attrition, those specific tracking intervals we talked about, and the critical balance of raw numbers and ratios, I want to leave you with this. What does your organization's retention look like at the critical 6-month mark? Are you merely tracking the departures, or are you actively measuring the successes? It's a fascinating dynamic, and honestly, having the right data structure makes all the difference. Keep exploring your data, and I'll see you in the next explainer.